No one is truly prepared to hear that the soul knows the exact time of its own death. And yet, there is something within us that has always known. A subtle, almost imperceptible vibration that precedes the final silence. Perhaps you felt it, a causeless chill, a sudden serenity in the face of chaos. A presence that watches behind your eyes and seems to whisper, "The time is coming to go home." Carl Jung said that the human psyche doesn't live in the linear time the body inhabits. It moves in circles, recognizing the beginning in the end, and the end in the beginning. And as this cycle nears its conclusion, the unconscious begins to send signals, not to frighten us, but to prepare us. Because death, from this perspective, is not a brutal interruption, but a passage meticulously engineered by the soul. But what does it really mean to be ready to die? This question, as old as fear itself, hangs over humanity like a mirror. We run from it, pushing it into the darkest corners of our consciousness, believing that ignoring it protects us. But the more we deny it, the more it haunts us in dreams, in sudden illnesses, in coincidences that defy reason. And Jung, with his profound insight, would say that what we call coincidence, it's just the symbolic language of the soul trying to wake us up. Imagine that every event in your life, a loss, an encounter, a nagging intuition, is part of an invisible plan, designed not to punish you, but to teach you how to return. Because death, seen up close, is a patient teacher. It doesn't arrive all at once. It announces itself in whispers. The body begins to detach itself from small attachments. The mind turns inward. Time seems to lose its rigidity. It is at this moment that the spirit begins to remember the path back to its origin. Some call it a premonition, others a hallucination. But perhaps it's just the soul regaining its lost lucidity. Have you ever noticed how at certain moments the world seems to become clearer, as if everything around you glows with a hidden meaning? At those moments, something inside you shifts. Reality takes on a new density. The voices, the smells, the light. Everything seems charged with meaning. Jung would describe this as return of the self, the call from the deepest center of the psyche, reminding the ego that it was never the owner of the journey, only the traveler. And it is at this point that fear begins to dissolve, because the fear of death is not the fear of disappearing. It is the fear of recognizing that we were never just what we believed ourselves to be. The ego fears dying because it confuses itself with the body, but the soul does not fear. It knows. It recognizes in the end the same radiance it found at birth. Yet there is a paradox. Modern man believes that consciousness is a product of the brain, a chemical phenomenon that fades when the body fails. But what if it's the other way around? What if the brain is merely the physical mirror of something much larger? Jung saw consciousness as a field that extends beyond the individual, an ocean of meaning in which we are all immersed. In this ocean, dying is simply emerging from the small bubble of the I and returning to being the whole. When the body begins to decline, it's as if the mirror begins to crack, and through the cracks, the light from the other side begins to filter through. Some experience this light as peace, others as longing. Isn't it strange that in the months before death, so many people report dreams of travel, of doors, of deep waters, or of voices calling their name? Jung observed this phenomenon in his patients and recognized in it the symbol of the crossing, the psyche already rehearsing the return. What if the soul truly knows? What if it prepares us in advance, not through prophecies, but through subtle sensations, coincidences, shifts in perception? Perhaps the true purpose of life is precisely to learn to die before we die, to let go of the illusions of control, to recognize that each experience is a metaphor for eternal rebirth. But there's something more disturbing. What if the signs have already begun within you, and you haven't noticed yet? A weariness that isn't physical, a lightness that doesn't come from rest, a desire to retreat from the noise of the world, as if something within calls for another kind of silence, the same silence that precedes dawn, not the end of light but the beginning of another way of seeing. Carl Jung called this moment threshold of the self, the passage in which the soul begins to remember its true home. And when this happens, death ceases to be an enemy. It becomes a mirror where we finally recognize who we always were. So maybe we shouldn't ask when we will die, but when will we begin to awaken to who we truly are? Because it is in this awakening that fear dissolves, and the soul finally finds peace in its own mystery. But before understanding how this preparation happens, before seeing the signs clearly, we must cross the first and most dangerous frontier, that of self-deception. The moment we realize that the world we call reality may be nothing more than a veil, and that the soul's true calling echoes behind it, waiting to be heard. And when that call finally becomes audible, nothing remains the same. The journey begins. There's an invisible moment when something within us begins to shift. There's no warning, no obvious external sign, just a slow, silent reorientation of the gaze. What once seemed urgent loses its luster. Noisy conversations tire. The world's excess becomes intolerable. And without understanding exactly why, the person begins to seek silence as if searching for air. Carl Jung described this movement as the call of interiority, the return of the soul to its own home. It's not an escape, it's a reunion. The spirit preparing for the crossing begins to withdraw like the sea before high tide. Think of that friend who suddenly starts turning down dates, parties, trips. "I don't feel like it," he says, and everyone interprets it as discouragement. But there's something deeper. He begins walking alone through parks, sitting for long minutes before a window, listening to the wind with a never-before-seen attention. The solitude that envelops him isn't absence, but presence. It's as if, in the stillness, he hears a music that others don't hear, and those observing him from the outside may worry, unaware that he's merely answering an ancient call, that of the soul preparing to detach itself from form. There comes a time when solitude ceases to be discomfort and becomes a refuge. The body begins to understand what the mind still resists, that life is not a straight line but a self-closing circle. Jung asserted that the unconscious has its own rhythms, and when the body's time and the soul's time begin to align, the individual feels this pressure from the center. It is the inner life expanding, demanding space. An elderly woman once recounted that, months before becoming ill, she began waking up in the middle of the night with an indescribable sensation. It wasn't fear, nor pain. It was a serene desire to look at the sky. She would sit by the window, enveloped in the dark blanket of dawn, and remain there, motionless, until the first light of day. She said that, in those moments, she felt something like a loving presence, a memory that came from nowhere. When she finally became ill, she showed no despair. "I had been talking to the silence for a long time," she confided. "This is the first sign, the call of solitude, and it should not be confused with sadness. What is being withdrawn is not joy, but noise. The external world begins to lose its importance because consciousness is turning to what has always been within. It is a sacred retreat, similar to that of animals who, when they sense their end is near, seek a quiet corner to rest. They do not hide. They simply follow their instinct to return to what is essential. But there's something more subtle going on behind this search for silence. When the soul begins to let go, ties to material things weaken. A man who has always been passionate about collecting watches decides to donate them. A woman who obsessively kept photos one day realizes she no longer needs them to remember. An elderly man who once hoarded books feels that a few volumes are enough, perhaps just one, the one he never had the courage to finish. None of this is forced renunciation. It's a liberation that arises naturally, like a leaf that detaches from a tree at the exact moment the right wind blows. Carl Jung described this process as an antiodromy, the movement by which everything that was extreme tends to return to its opposite. Life, which once projected itself outward, now turns inward. The gaze that sought the world now seeks meaning, and the more the soul prepares itself, the lighter the being becomes. Begins to understand that possession does not sustain existence, and that the identity constructed with so much effort, the roles, the titles, the achievements, are not what truly defines it. It is at this point that something mysterious happens. Many report a sudden clarity, as if a fog had lifted. It is the moment when the individual understands that they have always been surrounded by symbols, and that everything, even pain, had a purpose. Jung would say it is the self revealing its luminous face, guiding the psyche back to balance. The soul, recognizing itself, ceases resistance. But this process isn't always smooth. Sometimes letting go manifests as loss, a job that ends unexpectedly, a relationship that falls apart, a house that needs to be left behind. The ego screams, the body suffers, but something deeper is at work behind it all, an invisible intelligence, moving the pieces of destiny to free what was still trapped. What seems like ruin is actually preparation. And it is precisely at this point that fear returns with a vengeance. Human beings accustomed to defining themselves by their possessions and relationships feel they are disappearing. But this disappearance is illusory. What dissolves is only the shell. Jung believed that the unconscious, as it approaches wholeness, demands the sacrifice of false identities. And this sacrifice, though painful, is the harbinger of true integration. If you've ever felt this silent calling, this urge to retreat from the world, to retreat without explanation, to live with less, perhaps you've already experienced the beginnings of this preparation. There's nothing wrong with feeling this. On the contrary, there's something profoundly right. The soul doesn't seek death, it seeks clarity. It simply begins to remember that it belongs to something greater. And when this memory becomes conscious, fear begins to transform into curiosity. Death ceases to be an endpoint and becomes a crossing. The body prepares, the mind quiets, and the spirit, like a flame that flickers before burning brighter, begins to expand. But there is a second, even more mysterious, subtle sign that often goes unnoticed even by the most sensitive. A phenomenon that, when it begins, alters the perception of time and desire, revealing that the soul is already detaching itself from the fabric of matter. And when it manifests, it is impossible to ignore. Something starts to disappear, and what comes in its place changes everything. It's a strange moment when what was once essential begins to dissolve. There's no visible drama, no abrupt rupture, just a slow evaporation of what no longer holds weight on the soul. The things that once defined who you were become too light, as if they no longer fit within the expanding internal reality. Accumulated objects lose their luster. Memories that sustained pride seem distant. Arguments that once seemed vital now sound like echoes from another existence. The external world, with its demands and definitions, no longer holds the same gravitational power. Something inside you is loosening. Carl Jung said that everything the unconscious touches becomes a symbol, and this is precisely what happens when the soul begins to withdraw its energy from attachments. Each apparent loss is, in fact, a symbolic translation of a liberation. It's as if consciousness is gathering its strength from the disguises it has worn for a lifetime, the name, the body, the story, to return to something more essential. At this point, ambition loses its meaning not out of disinterest but out of clarity. The desire to win is replaced by the desire to understand. And here the first inevitable question arises. How many of your desires are really yours? And how many belong to the character you created to survive? When the soul begins to prepare for the crossing, roles fall away. You realize that you are not the successful, nor the failure, nor the generous, nor the guilty. You are something that lies behind all these masks. This recognition brings peace, but also vertigo, because by freeing yourself from definitions, you enter a nameless territory. It is the void from which all consciousness is reborn. Jung called this point the confrontation with the self, where the ego kneels before that which is greater than itself. Some report that, during this process, reality begins to feel different. Colors gain an indescribable intensity. Time seems to slow down. What was once banal takes on an almost sacred presence. The steam from the coffee, the distant sound of rain, the light flickering on the wall. There's a strange clarity to small things, as if the world, for a moment, reveals itself without the filter of the mind. And then comes the doubt that pierces the silence. Am I going crazy or waking up? Because what happens next defies all logic. Perception expands. Dreams become more real than waking life. Sometimes you encounter loved ones who have passed away and they don't speak. They just look at you tenderly, as if to say, it's almost time. Other times you find yourself in unfamiliar places and paradoxically feel at home. There's no fear, just an ancient familiarity, a recognition no memory can explain. It's as if the soul begins to visit in dreams the abode that awaits it. Carl Jung saw dreams of death not as harbingers of the end, but as symbols of transition. For him, each dream image is a bridge between the visible and invisible worlds. When the soul begins to remember its origins, the unconscious expands its field of expression, and what we call the supernatural is nothing more than the natural magnified. But the phenomenon isn't limited to sleep. During the day, something changes in the texture of reality. You begin to sense presences not with your eyes, but with intuition. A slight chill runs over your skin, as if the air were denser. Sometimes you feel like you're being watched, not by something threatening, but by something immensely loving, as if an invisible consciousness is accompanying you, preparing the way. Have you ever had the feeling that the air around you recognizes you? Some people report at this stage a sudden ability to perceive other people's emotions with uncanny precision. You walk into a room and sense sadness before anyone says a word, or without understanding what's going to happen before it happens. Jung described this state as living synchronicity, the moment when the personal and collective unconscious touch, dissolving the boundaries of time and distance. It is the psyche tuning into frequencies that were previously beyond its hearing. The world begins to behave symbolically. A bird landing on a window at the exact moment you think of someone. A clock stopping at the same minute a loved one passes away. Small cracks in the structure of causality. To the rational, they are coincidences. To the soul, they are messages. It's the universe speaking its original language, the one that precedes words. But the most disturbing part is yet to come, the moment when this heightened perception ceases to be intermittent and becomes a continuous state. It's when you begin to realize that what you used to call the world is just one layer of reality, and that there are others, subtle, silent, coexisting here, now. Sometimes you feel them more than you see them, a light that seems to breathe, a sound without origin, a vibration that passes through the air. What if what we call life is just one of the possible frequencies of consciousness? This is the revelation that frightens and liberates at the same time. Because if there are other dimensions, then death is not an interruption, it is a change of tune. Jung said that death is the goal of life, not as an end, but as integration. What dies is only the limit. What continues is the field, the invisible ocean that has always sustained all forms. When the soul reaches this point, fear begins to turn into curiosity, and curiosity into reverence. The individual understands that physical existence was merely a rehearsal, one of the infinite ways in which consciousness experiences itself. They realize that reality does not end in the visible, it merely unfolds. But there is an even more profound moment in this journey, when the soul, already partially detached, begins to recognize itself not just as consciousness, but as part of something infinitely greater. This is the beginning of the forgetting of separation, the prelude to return. And this is where the third sign is complete. The veil between the worlds begins to tear, and what reveals itself behind it is not darkness. It is a light so vast that the human mind has not yet invented words to describe it. There's a moment in the human journey when the past begins to call to us with an inexplicable force. It's not nostalgia, it's necessity. A silent urgency to understand what was experienced, as if each memory were asking to be reorganized in a new light. Suddenly, old scenes come back to mind, a look left unanswered, a word spoken in anger, a gesture of love never acknowledged. Everything returns, but in a different way, not as pain, but as a lesson. The soul, already in the process of detachment, seems to want to gather what it has sown, integrate what remains unfinished, understand the secret meaning of each encounter. Carl Jung described this phenomenon as the archetypal retrospective, the moment when the unconscious invites the individual to revisit their own myth. Because each life is a lived myth, and the soul, before departing, desires to understand the story it has written. It is at this point that many feel a sudden urge to seek out people from the past, an old friend with whom they have lost touch, a love that was never said goodbye, someone who was hurt for no reason. The search is not born of guilt, but of completeness. The soul wants to close the circles that the ego left open. Have you ever felt this sudden urge to say something to someone, not to make amends, but to release what's stuck inside? Many describe this phase as an unexpected emotional awakening. Reserved people become outgoing. Others, always agitated, become silent. It's as if an invisible force is rearranging the threads of life so that everything is in order before their return. Interestingly, this inner review isn't just psychological. There are records of hospital patients who, just days before leaving, ask to speak to someone specific, and when they do, they leave peacefully soon after, as if a simple forgiveness were the key to unlocking the final door. And then there are the dreams, increasingly vivid. In them, the individual relives scenes they thought forgotten, but with a different perspective. The absent father appears not as an accusation, but as a symbol of learning, The mistake made emerges as a turning point, not a condemnation. Jung believed that the unconscious, as it approaches the threshold of death, becomes more transparent, and the soul begins to retrace its trajectory as if contemplating a complete picture for the first time. Have you ever wondered if the people who come back to you aren't actually coming back in a deeper way? Not as memories, but as messengers of a greater understanding. This revision is not punishment, it is purification. The soul does not seek perfection, it seeks balance. What was guilt transforms into understanding, what was lost transforms into meaning. In this process, time seems to bend, past and present merge, and the individual realizes that they have always been the same being, simply expressing themselves in different forms. There are curious accounts of people who, for no apparent reason, feel the urge to record their memories, not for posterity, but as if needing to transfer the experience to another plane. One 82-year-old man wrote 50 letters in a single night, addressed to people he had loved, hurt, or simply met by chance. He didn't expect any replies. He simply said, "I felt the need to return everything that was given to me, even without knowing the value of each thing." Shortly thereafter, he fell asleep and never woke up. Is it a coincidence, or does the soul, upon completing its symbolic inventory, recognize that it has fulfilled its task? This impulse to revisit is more than memory. It is integration. The psyche, realizing that the physical journey is ending, begins to transform experiences into wisdom. Each memory becomes energy, each emotion becomes light. Jung compared this process to the alchemist who, at the end of his work, distills the essence of everything he has experienced. The soul wants to take with it the gold of consciousness, that which remains when everything else fades away. But there's something even more mysterious that happens right after this review phase. When the soul has gathered its experiences and closed its cycles, a feeling emerges that has no precise name. It's not sadness, nor is it joy. It's a kind of longing for something that was never lost, a memory that doesn't belong to this world. The person begins to look up at the sky frequently, as if searching for a fixed point beyond the clouds. Songs bring tears for no reason. The trees seem older, the wind more familiar. Have you ever felt like there is a place where you belong, even though you don't know where it is? Carl Jung saw this feeling as a sign of a return to the collective unconscious, the origin of all souls. As individual consciousness approaches this frontier, it begins to remember what it means to be whole. Therefore, the longing grows. It's not a desire to escape, it's recognition. The soul feels the call of home. It is at this point that many describe unlikely experiences. People who, on the brink of death, claim to see lights, hear voices, or feel a welcoming presence. Scientists might call these hallucinations, but Jung, if he were there, would say they are real symbols, manifestations of the unconscious merging with universal consciousness. Heaven is not above, it is within, waiting to be recognized. A case reported in a Swiss hospital describes a patient who, while in a coma, softly spoke the names of places that didn't exist on Earth. When she awoke, she reported being in a city made of sound and light, where everything vibrated in harmony. She said there was no pain there, only memory. Days later, she passed away. The doctors called it delirium. Jung, if he had listened, might have called it revelation. And this is where the fourth sign becomes the prelude to the fifth. Because after reviewing life and integrating what has been learned, the being begins to feel called to another home, a home that never ceased to exist, but was veiled by the density of the body. It is the return to the origin. Can you feel that call, even if distant, like an inaudible note sustaining all the others? This is the final sign of transition, the point at which the soul, now light and lucid, begins to look not back, but beyond. The place from which the flame came begins to call it back, and when it hears, there is no more fear, no more resistance, only the sweet recognition that the path has always been back home. It is at this point that time begins to lose its meaning. The soul, now relieved of the weight of illusions, feels the call of home like a distant sound that guides it effortlessly. It is not sadness, but recognition. It is like a child who, after a long summer away, feels the thrill of returning home. The journey was beautiful, full of discoveries, but home is where the soul breathes what it has always been. And when this call becomes conscious, something extraordinary happens. The return begins while still alive. The body remains, but consciousness begins to inhabit another space, larger, quieter, more real. Carl Jung described this state as the union of opposites. Life and death meet and cease to be enemies. In this encounter, a serenity emerges that frightens those still trapped in matter. Fear dissolves because there is no longer any separation to fear. And when the being accepts this flow, home ceases to be a destination and becomes a presence. What once seemed beyond the veil begins to pulsate within one's own chest. The individual feels such profound peace that they begin to doubt whether they are still alive. But it is precisely in this moment that life, for the first time, becomes full. But not everyone accepts the call gracefully. There are those who resist, trying to hold on to the world that slips through their fingers. They cling to names, memories, promises, like someone trying to hold back the wind. It is then that the final tests arise. The small ruptures in everyday life that seem to test how much the being has truly learned to let go. A phone that rings with no one on the other end. A beloved object that breaks without explanation. A delay, a coincidence, an unlikely reunion. The universe begins to speak through signs, guiding the spirit to loosen the final knot. Have you ever noticed how certain events repeat themselves until we finally decide to let them go? This is how the soul completes its preparation, through repetition that reveals what has not yet been accepted. Jung saw this as the symbolic intelligence of the unconscious, a patient teacher who repeats the lesson until the student awakens. Each coincidence is a reminder that control is an illusion. Each loss is an invitation to trust, and when trust matures, resistance dissolves. The being stops fighting death and begins to walk with it, side by side, as if recognizing an old companion. But there is a moment of inevitable tension, the instant when the body is still here, but the soul no longer entirely belongs to it. Reality begins to shatter like thin glass. One perceives the world vibrating at two frequencies, one visible and one invisible, which attracts one with increasing force. One might be in the middle of a conversation and suddenly feel everything around one move away, as if sound and time slowed. In this interval, the ego tries to react. It wants to cling to the familiar, but the familiar no longer exists. What if true home is not a place, but a state of consciousness that you have always carried and are only now beginning to remember? This is the turning point. Home is not the end of the journey. It is the point from which it always began. The soul, upon feeling the call, is not leaving. It is awakening, and this realization transforms everything. Because by understanding that death is merely the return to that which was never lost, life ceases to be fear and becomes celebration. Jung said that death is the culmination of individuation, the moment when the being recognizes itself as whole. And when this wholeness manifests itself, even the body seems to respond. There is a different glow in the eyes, a calm that no words can explain. But there is something even deeper, the ultimate paradox. When the soul fully accepts the return, the remaining time gains new intensity. Every gesture becomes sacred, every breath, a prayer. The awareness of finitude ignites gratitude. The person begins to live with unprecedented attention, as if each moment were a farewell and a reunion at the same time. And it is in this full living that the cycle closes. Not through death, but through integration. Have you ever noticed that when someone lives with so much presence, they seem to be in two worlds at the same time? This is the final lesson. The soul, preparing to depart, actually teaches the living to remain. It shows that it is not necessary to die to touch the eternal, that it is possible to experience home while still within the body. That separation never existed, except in the mind that has forgotten its origin. When a being understands this, peace ceases to be a promise and becomes a state. They no longer fear the crossing because they are already living it. And it is at this point that consciousness expands to such an extent that the boundary between here and beyond dissolves completely. There is no death, only passage. There is no loss, only change of form. Carl Jung would say that it is at this moment that the self takes over, the center that has always silently guided everything. The being smiles, perhaps cries, perhaps just closes its eyes and takes a deep breath. But something inside already knows. There is nothing more to fear, because the home that calls has never been far away. It has always been there, waiting, at the heart of everything. And it is precisely at that moment, when silence becomes music and time bends into light, that the soul finally remembers who it is. Everything said so far converges on a single point. Understanding death is learning, finally, to live. This is not some distant mysticism, but a daily practice. Each of the 5 manifestations, solitude, detachment, expanded perception, life review, and the call home, are not omens, but exercises in consciousness. They are ways in which the soul remembers its true nature. When we realize this, something changes forever. Fear no longer has a place, and in its place is born a serene lucidity, the certainty that nothing is lost, nothing ends, nothing is in vain. Carl Jung asserted that the human psyche is guided by an instinct for wholeness. It's as if the soul, in every gesture, seeks itself. Thus, understanding death isn't about anticipating the end, but about approaching this wholeness. What we call spiritual life is nothing more than the attempt to live before death forcibly awakens us. And when this understanding matures, everyday life changes its texture. Small things acquire symbolic weight: the gaze of a stranger, the silence between 2 words, the moment the sun touches the wall. Everything becomes a message. Everything is a bridge. But there comes a time when reflection needs to become action. Knowledge is only true when it transforms our way of being. What then should we do with all this? Start by letting go. Let go of what has already served its purpose: objects, guilt, expectations. Practice silence. Take time to listen to what doesn't speak, to notice what doesn't show itself. Cultivate a heightened perception, one that sees meaning in coincidences and presence in simple moments. Revisit your history honestly, not to judge, but to understand. And above all, acknowledge the longing that lives within you, the longing for your origins, the yearning for your spiritual home. Have you ever noticed that this feeling of loss that accompanies us all might not be pain, but a compass? When we live in harmony with this longing, we don't need to wait for death to find meaning. It becomes a silent ally, reminding us that there is still light to be embraced, forgiveness to be granted, love to be expressed. And paradoxically, the more we accept finitude, the more intensely life reveals itself. The awareness of death expands love because it teaches the urgency of tenderness. It teaches us to say what needs to be said, to be present with those we love, to not postpone what is essential. Jung said that human beings become complete when they accept their shadow and their light as parts of the same whole. Likewise, we become truly alive when we accept death as an inseparable part of life. And that's the secret. There's no transition to be feared, only understood. When it's understood, the cycle closes in peace. But perhaps the most beautiful thing is this: by understanding that consciousness is eternal, we realize that we are all connected by an invisible web of love. What you feel, what you learn, what you forgive, echoes beyond time. Every act of compassion expands not only your soul, but the very fabric of existence. Death takes nothing. It only returns to the whole that which has already become light. Have you ever imagined what would change in your life if you truly believed that love never dies? Living this way means transforming fear into gratitude. It means waking up each morning knowing that time is sacred. It means treating each person as part of the same journey. It means seeing life as a school and death as the graduation from a long apprenticeship. When this vision is achieved, anxiety loses its power, guilt melts away, and the present becomes the only place where eternity can be touched. So, don't wait until the last moment to begin. Bring this awareness into the present. Live as if you've already overcome fear and discovered that nothing is broken. Life is preparation, and death is the celebration of learning. True awakening is realizing that everything we seek outside has always been within us. And when this realization sets in, the home that seemed distant reveals itself in the center of your chest, luminous and silent, calling you not to leave, but to stay awake. If these words touched something within you, if they helped bring clarity or peace, allow this gesture to multiply. Like this video, leave a comment, even if anonymous, and share what you felt. And if you wish to continue exploring this path of consciousness, subscribe to the channel. Together, we will continue the journey of understanding life, death, and everything in between, because it is in this invisible space that the soul finally recognizes its infinity.